USF is an extraordinary campus. This is a commuter campus with a large local student Arab population, many of whom are virulently anti-Jewish, and they're constructing a literal siege against the local Hillel and the pro-Israel community. Like elsewhere, harassment against Jews here skyrocketed after October 7th.
And now, The Edwin Black Show. Sponsored by the Books of Edwin Black, available on Amazon and at booksellers worldwide. And now, here's Edwin.
Hello, everyone. I'm Edwin Black, investigative journalist, historian, and author of 225 editions in 40 languages in 190 countries worldwide, including IBM and the Holocaust, War Against the Weak, and the Farhud, as well as many other books. This is a show for opinion makers and decision makers, not mass clicks. So if you think our show's content is meaningful, spread the word throughout your most informed networks. Subscribe for free alerts at theedwinblackshow.com. And if you want to support our work, we need your assistance. Please visit theedwinblackshow.com/support. Your help, big or small, assures our complete and utter intellectual and uncensored journalistic independence. Today's episode is made possible and sponsored without any preconditions, requests, or stipulations by Save the West and USF Hillel in Tampa. If you would like to honor someone with a sponsorship, contact us. That said, remember, I only speak for myself and for history. The same goes for my guests. Today, we welcome viewers from across America, including our 4 watch parties in the villages. Still have Newton, Mass., Chicago, and Tampa Bay up close and personal. Hi, Harvey. Overseas, I see viewers logged on from most of our usuals. I think I see Australia, New Zealand, Germany, Holland once again, Sweden, France, Italy, Spain, Poland, be there next month, Great Britain, Canada, Colombia, Mexico, and Israel, plus other countries. If you have a question, place one short sentence in Zoom's QA feature. The Edwin Black Show, along with our YouTube site, is global and fast growing, enjoying many scores of thousands of views. We speak frankly and without tremor to a fragmented world, seeking better understanding of our tormented past, our present, very, very tense, and a turbulent future, still uncertain. By the way, stay tuned for my special word of wisdom at the very end of the show, just before I sign off. We're on the road again, and today we're live from the University of South Florida in always beautiful Tampa. USF is an extraordinary campus. I've lectured here several times on history and environment, but this is a commuter campus with a large local student Arab population, many of whom are virulently anti-Jewish, and they're constructing a literal siege against the local Hillel and the pro-Israel community. Like elsewhere, harassment against Jews here skyrocketed after October 7th. Hence, it is fitting that our first guest is author and film director Wendy Sachs, who has compiled a must-see documentary about the anti-Jewish outrages we have seen on our campuses and elsewhere. It is more than a complaint film. It is an investigative revelation. I saw it a few weeks ago in Mexico City at a private screening, and the director aptly did not call her film October 7. She called it October 8. Here to tell us about this glass-crushing film, October 8th, is Wendy Sachs from an airport location just before she flies to LA. Take the screen, Wendy.
Hi there. Thank you, Edwin. It's great to be here, and what a beautiful open to the film. Thank you so much for the huge endorsement. I'm thrilled to be here. And as you said, listen, my film is October 8th. It's about the explosion of anti-Semitism on college campuses and on social media and in the streets of America in the aftermath of Hamas's attack on Israel on October 7th.
So, what's been the reaction to the pre-release screenings?
I mean, the reaction has been tremendous. I mean, truly tremendous, and not just from the Jewish world, from non-Jews. I mean, the way that we cut this film, we really intentionally made this film for non-Jewish audiences. We're unpacking a lot here. We're exposing the fact that SJP, has been on college campuses for decades, that Hamas in America has been seeding their messaging for decades. And it was not a surprise. It was not sort of an organic reaction to October 7th, what we saw on October 8th and beyond on college campuses, that there was a toolkit in place, that the messaging got, disseminated across college campuses within hours after the attack. And we do investigative reporting in the film that traces Hamas in America back decades, back to the early 90s, back to a Marriott hotel room meeting where there was an FBI wiretap that caught Hamas in America talking about how they were going to infiltrate American institutions from the media to college campuses and what kind of messaging they were going to have to use to be palatable to an American audience. When they were speaking to people on the left, they would use certain messaging like apartheid and colonialism. And when they were speaking to people on the right, they would use different messaging.
Okay, so it so happens that listening to our show right now is the Hillels of North Texas and the Southwest Jewish Congress. They've already signed up to air the film. If anybody wants to schedule this film, such as the USF in Hillel here or other synagogues and other viewing theaters, who would they get in touch with?
Well, let me tell you, the film is actually going to be distributed in theaters across America starting on March 14th. The previews are March 13th. AMC is going to be showing the film. It is a huge, huge deal that AMC Theaters is taking on this film. So I'm encouraging everyone to look at our website, october8film.com. It shows 90 theaters across America, and that list is growing every single day. I'm going to be opening the film at Lincoln Square on March 13th in previews. I know it's Purim, but for those who want to come, I will be there. Then I'm flying to Los Angeles, then Chicago, then Nashville, then Washington, D.C. We need to show Hollywood that there is a demand for this movie. So aside from private screenings at Hillels, I encourage everyone to actually go to the movie theater and see this film, because that's what Hollywood needs to see. We had an Academy Award run. We were not shortlisted. There's a lot. We know that there is like an allergy to these types of films in Hollywood. So it's really, really critical that we get people into the movie theaters.
All right, everybody, you heard what we need. You need to stand up to the system that's trying to wipe out what we are standing for. It's October 8th. Wendy, thank you very much. And if anyone has a hard time finding out where to get this film, get in touch with me and see it in a movie first and everywhere else second. Wendy, fly to LA safely and knock him dead out there, okay?
Thank you so much. And you can all follow me on Instagram, W Sachs on Instagram, and October 8th Film also on Instagram. We're posting every single day. So many incredible people are involved in this film. Deborah Messing, Michael Rappaport, Sheryl Sandberg, Scott Galloway, Noah Tishby. The list goes on, and incredible, incredible college students. So thank you so much, Edwin, for having me on.
Thank you, Wendy, and Bon Route and Baruch Hashem with your compelling project. Now, because we are at USF, we know the focal point for the anti-Jewish and anti-Israel outrage is the local Hillel. I've appeared here many times at this university, and I remember being here for the sole defiant purpose of having a Shabbat dinner in peace. That simple act required armed campus police surrounding the yard and the dinner event. This is how we embrace the peace of God's holy command to rest one day. This is how we lit candles, broke bread, and lifted our plastic wine goblets to the sky. We did so within a Kevlar perimeter of police protection, men with automatic weapons, and blockading vehicles. Tampa viewers such as Harvey will remember the night that we defiantly thanked God in our own Hillel backyard, regardless of the consequences. And that night, we indeed won. We made Shabbos. Now, for the one person who has most courageously stood up for the student body and stood up to the body of hate, we go directly to the Hillel Executive Director, Sylvie Feinsmith, a woman who has simultaneously gone toe-to-toe with the authorities and extended a helping hand to every needing hand of every student. We go to Sylvie Feinsmith. Sylvie, take the camera and hold nothing back, not a word. Faculty, administration, anti-Israel student groups, say your piece. Go, Sylvie.
Edwin, thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for that beautiful introduction. So it is no secret that Jewish life at USF has been a challenging existence since prior to October 7th. I will start off by saying that the situation on campus has improved since last year by the grace of God, and also the pressure of a lot of elected officials, and a lot of noise made by individuals in specific positions of power and those with soapboxes. After October 7th last year, the existence of a Jewish student on this campus was one of the most tenuous and traumatic experiences that I've ever personally witnessed in my life. Our students were bombarded. It was an overload. It was in their classrooms. It was in their dorms. It was on their paths to school. And the only environment they had where they were sheltered in safety, where they could be proud Jewish students, Zionists, without having to be questioned, where they could sit just in existence and honor their history and their people, was Hillel. Needless to say, we stay in that vein. Hillel will always remain a Zionist space, regardless of trends within or without the Jewish community. But it's hard to express what occurred last year. It's hard to really communicate in detail, effectively, the scope of the issues. Where would you like me to continue, Edwin?
Well, I'd like to ask, first of all, I'd like to thank you, Sylvie. I know the courageous work that you are doing. I'd like to ask you, Sylvie, do you think that you can sense a change since the Trump administration came into power on January 20th?
I think we all can. And I'm very happy to admit that I've seen it. But mind you, I live in the great state of Florida, and our elected officials had common sense before Trump was elected. I'm very proud to say that I live in what I consider to be the safest state in the nation for Jews, both on college campuses and off. So there was a better environment in the state of Florida for the most part, USF being very much an outlier to that, right? The Tampa area being different than the rest of the state. USF, for the most part, was the safest state in the nation last year. And since January 6th, it's only gotten better.
Well, a couple of things. If USF is making progress, why did the Anti-Defamation League rate you with a C grade for safety and security? And this was just released.
Correct. This was released on Monday. And it's a grade I stand behind. I'm very comfortable with the grade. That grade marks the improvements made and the efforts on behalf of the administration. They've made some moves that have caused real change on campus. Our students, for instance, are no longer bombarded as they leave their dorms or classrooms with anti-American, anti-Israel, anti-Semitic, pro-terror protests. Our school has managed to toe the line between protection of freedom of speech and protection of civil rights. So that's one way in which the university has stepped up. In addition, they have made sure to discipline key student leaders, individuals who were influential. They were the reason that our campus was so toxic last year. We have students who were deported. We have students who were expelled. We have students who were suspended. I'm grateful the work the administration has done. I concur that a C is an appropriate grade for us. It shows where we've come from, but it also shows that we have a lot more work to do. We're not done.
Tell us about the bomb threat.
The bomb scare was very frightening. There was a conversation held on social media. A student made an inappropriate comment, and it was deemed by authorities to be threatening enough to cause us to evacuate the building. By the grace of God, there was nothing in our building, and our armed police department did their job, and they secured our facility. They ensured that the students and staff in the building, myself included, were safe. But that was an immensely traumatic experience, one which was met with, at best, gaslighting. And there were individuals within the community who actually publicly stated that I lied about it. And that's kind of been a theme, not just me as the leader, but students in general. There have been people that have gaslit our experience. They've silenced or minimized our experiences. And that seems to be a theme. You know, last year, the messaging was very much don't rock the boat. And the pain in our lived experiences were actively minimized. Now, don't get me wrong. I have very, very little expectation of an anti-Semite, very little. However, when it comes to members of our own community and individuals that Jews, students, staff at Hillel, anybody should be able to count on, when they let you down and they gaslight you and they claim that you're lying when you're trying to protect your peers or your students or your staff, that betrayal stings.
Let's talk about the administration. Did they help you or hinder you?
At first, they hindered. Now they've been helpful. The relationship has improved dramatically.
But you had to fight for that improvement. Is that correct?
Damn right. Yes.
And you were supported by members of the Jewish community outside of the school. Is that correct?
Yes. In many instances, yes.
All right. Well, we're going to stick with you. So thank you very, very much, Sylvie. Next, as we prepare for the March of the Living next month, that is the 80th anniversary observing the end of the Holocaust, as our leaders worldwide are compelled to concede we are back to where we started when Hitler and his international coalition of Nazi thugs came to power to galvanize and mechanize an international hate machine in a surge of persecution throughout Europe and the Middle East, a fascist movement that finally exploded into what we now know as the Second World War. As we confront our present tense and survey our future, we must examine the painful realities of our past. That is why I will be traveling to Poland next month to Auschwitz as the scholar in residence once again of the International March of the Living, which thanks to crusaders such as Phyllis Heidemann and a community of never forgetting warriors, irrepressibly marching the 3 hallowed kilometers from Auschwitz to the Birkenau extermination apparatus. When we speak of the history of the Holocaust, when I look at my own scores of book editions in many languages, I have to confront this fact that unlike dozens of other exterminations and massacres, one fearless, unforgettable, history-hammering man, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, General and President Dwight D. Eisenhower, master of the Allied forces, who waded in against the bullets at Normandy, and later a great post-war president indeed. This one-man Eisenhower had the vision after he stood amid the stinging stench of death and torture at Ohrdruf and Dachau camps, and later at Buchenwald, where he confronted the skeletalized survivors and the unbelievable relics of the inhumanity. Eisenhower declared these words, I'm quoting it now, quote, "Get it all on record now. Get the films, get the witnesses, because somewhere down the road of history, some bastard will get up and say that this never happened," close quote. He further wrote, "I have never felt able to describe my emotional reactions when I first came face to face with indisputable evidence of Nazi brutality and ruthless disregard of every shred of decency." I'm quoting, "Up to that time, I had only known about it generally or through secondary sources. I am certain, however, that I have never at any other time experienced an equal sense of shock." He also wrote, quote, "I visited every nook and cranny of the camp because I felt it my duty to be in a position from then on to testify firsthand about these things in case there ever grew up at home the belief or the assumption that the stories of Nazi brutality were just propaganda. And Eisenhower also added, quote, "I felt that the evidence should be immediately placed before the American and British publics in a fashion to leave no room for cynical doubt," close quote. Eisenhower's fist of history enabled so many authors, such as me, to chronicle the highly detailed, skin-crawling facts that smoldered across the ground of all Europe, from the first anti-Jewish statutes to the sick truth of the ovens. To help us understand more, I give you Merrill Eisenhower, great-grandson of the man who liberated Europe and torchbearer of General Eisenhower's legacy. Take the camera, Merrill.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me. I appreciate being on the show, Ms. Black. It's absolutely a privilege to be here. And I thank you for the panelists that were before me as well. The stories and things are something that we must consider and always talk about. My great-grandfather, whenever I talk about him, I always talk about him from the beginning, because it's important to understand that he was a humble man that grew up with very little. In fact, most of the time he walked around barefoot, and there's been many times that he actually used to have to wear his mother's shoes to school because they couldn't afford to get him new ones. That's important because you start seeing and understanding that where he's from in Abilene, Kansas, there's a sense of basic understanding of people and basic understanding that everyone is equal under the eyes of God. And so when you start looking through those things and you start understanding them, his mother was a severe pacifist. Ike was never supposed to be in the military to begin with, but education trumped pacifism, and eventually became a United States military officer going through West Point. In 1939, when the war started, there were rumors of concentration camps. Ike was a colonel at the time, and then eventually, obviously, became the Supreme Allied Commander. When he became the Supreme Allied Commander, he took it upon himself to lead from the front. And what I mean by that is, whenever they went and took Normandy and they took over, and they started moving through France, they started moving through Germany, they came across these concentration camps. And you're absolutely right. Whenever he said, bear witness to this, because one day they'll say this never happened. My grandfather, John, was one of those officers that came in and actually bared witness. He was the one that was taking photos and making sure that those things happen. I know for a fact it did. And everybody that's listening knows for a fact that it did. In fact, every 80 years in history, it tends to repeat itself. You have the same type of problems that repeat over and over again. And that's why celebrating the liberation of 80 years with the March of the Living is extremely important to me and my family. It's something that we have to bear witness to. Although we, as in general, the American people and around the world, can't truly understand the devastation of the populations that happen there, it is important for us to at least try to walk in their shoes and understand and take the time to do that. But Ike also spent his whole entire post-presidency as a man of peace. Our 27 years in the United States that we've had peaceful, no conflict situations, Ike's 7 of those years were President Eisenhower's. During his time there, he started organizations like Sister Cities, which is a program that moved people, cities, connect with other cities and learn about their cultures. In addition to that, he started People to People International, which did that individually. Why is that important? Because throughout history, most of the time, people bank destruction and wars on ignorance of people's cultures and populations. And it's important for you and I and everybody as world citizens. We forget that, yes, we're citizens of the United States or the citizen of the country that you represent, but you're also a global citizen. We all are humans. We're all human beings, and we should believe that we all have the same rights and equality throughout the time of history. Oftentimes, ignorance is the thing that allows for things like the Holocaust to happen and millions of lives to be lost because of the lack of understanding of cultures and the lack of understanding of individuals. And with that, my great-grandfather spent his whole entire life thereafter devoted to peace, making sure that same thing didn't happen that happened during those years, those horrific years, and in world history, the darkest years, if you will. And it's important for us to talk about those and celebrate the March of the Living, celebrate other organizations, celebrate the film that I just learned about that I cannot wait to go see. It's important for us as global citizens to stand up to the tyranny and stand up to the destruction and make sure that nothing happens to like what happened in Israel ever happens again to any country.
Significant. Thank you very much for that. Do you think that your great-grandfather would have believed that there was not one bastard who would get up to deny the Holocaust, but an entire industry and indeed an academic fungus stretching from coast to coast and overseas that all combine to deny the liberation and the devastation that your father encountered? Do you think he would have believed that?
I can tell you unequivocally that he absolutely knew that was going to happen. One thing that my great-grandfather did and understood was foresight. He understood that the devastation, the military-industrial complex, the weaponization of nuclear weapons, and people would deny the Holocaust as well. He knew. Everybody knew. One, to be honest with you, Mr. Black, it is impossible for somebody like you and I to truly understand what millions and millions and millions of lives laying on the ground, skeleton remains of living people being born, that are 3 pounds. That's not something we understand today. And because of the actions that we're taking back then, we've had 80 years of relative peace in that sense. But more importantly is relative forgetful because we've lived a good life in this country. And it's important for everybody to understand that it will happen again if we do not stand strong together, united, and support the Jewish population, support the Christian population, support the Islamic population, support everyone. And remember that we're all humans and sons and daughters of Abraham.
Well said. And I can ask you that because I know you're a skilled historian and you have a command of the facts of history of many times, I will ask you to stick around so I can come back to you when I go into my own reports. And so let's get to those reports. First, we can tell Sylvie Feinsmith at the Hillel. We can tell the Jewish students at USF, and we can tell the campuses across the nation that help is on the way. Trump is coming down like a lion out of Judah. He has made a priority of defeating the vicious wave of anti-Semitism burning across our hate-filled campuses. Attorney General Pam Bondi has been explicit in her promise to crush the KKK-style anti-Jewish foment at our colleges and universities. This promise has been echoed by HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy and Trump's newly Senate-approved Secretary of the Department of Education, Linda McMahon. And as hoped, an anti-Semitism task force has been formed. And this one is not a toothless and fluffy one like we've seen before. This task force will soon, very soon, come out swinging. The point man for that task force is Leo Terrell, a distinguished African-American expert veteran of various NAACP litigational efforts. He's a former Democrat turned Trump devotee. He excels at in-your-face Jewish defense. As senior counsel just appointed for the task force, Terrell has stated loudly and repeatedly, listen to these words, quote, the U.S. Department of Justice-led task force to combat anti-Semitism will soon file federal hate crime indictments against campus activists, quote, supporting Hamas and trying to intimidate Jews, close quote. Columbia, Barnard, listen to those words. Listen to the additional words that Terrell spoke to Jewish and Hebrew media just recently. Quote, you see all these disorderly demonstrations supporting Hamas and trying to intimidate Jews? We are going to put them in jail, not for 24 hours, but for years, period, close quote. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I know you all want it today. I want it today. Sylvie wants it today. But world peace, global economic parity, the dismantling of racist DEI, the reinforcement of Israel in its quest for absolute victory over evil, and all the rest of it. It can't happen all on the same day. I know we all want it to happen by Shabbos, but that's not how it's going to be. But it will happen in the coming days. And I say days and not weeks. I say yes, promises made, promises kept. Trump already dropped an early down payment on his promise by arresting and deporting Chinese UCLA pro-Hamas provocateur Liu Lijun. That was weeks ago. Now, Terrell, his first 10 targets have already been announced. George Washington University, Harvard University, Johns Hopkins University, New York University, Northwestern, UCLA, UC Berkeley, University of Minnesota, University of Southern California, and Columbia University. And Leo, do me a favor. When you write Columbia University in parentheses, write Barnard as well. So right now, facing a promise of defunding, Columbia University, get this, has already set up something called the Office of Institutional Equity. I don't think too many people know about this. Dozens of names, pro-Hamas agitators, are being reviewed for expulsion and other adverse action, including deportation for foreign students. Reportedly, after students received notification that they are under investigation for violations, Columbia requires them to sign an NDA to see the unredacted evidence against them. This effectively prevents them from discussing the accusations or even the process of the office publicly. So let this be a molecule of messaging to the liberal Jews who think that Trump is your nemesis. Judge him by his deeds. Wait a few days. You don't have to wait a few weeks. I think we'll see something happening. Sylvie, do you have a comment about this?
I'm thrilled. First and foremost, what we are seeing is not only occurring on the Ivy League campuses. The anti-Semitism is occurring on every campus in this country. And unfortunately, only the large named schools get the attention. I understand why that's the case. And in many instances, it's because it's the most egregious environments for Jews. But it's really important for this country and the people and decision makers to understand that this is happening on all campuses. It's on campuses of all sizes, private, public, you name it. We need to set very clear expectations of our institutions of higher education regarding what is acceptable and what is not. And let's just be frank, Jew hatred has become acceptable. We need our elected officials to come in and say, sorry, we're not going down that road. And then in addition to that, I'm immensely grateful because let's be real. We know it's always the Jews first. The enemies of the Jews in this country right now are the enemies of this country. It always works like that, and we are seeing it play out every day. We are seeing individuals taking gross, egregious advantage of their visas, the privilege to be in this great country, to come and spew anti-democratic, anti-American, anti-Semitic, pro-terror propaganda. That's unacceptable. The individuals that are coming after Jews on college campuses are the same individuals who are coming after our liberties. And our elected officials need to do something to address this.
All right, well said, Sylvie. And I know that much of what you said is even more documented with granulation in the film October 8th. Now, we want to move to the next topic, and that is Gaza. So what is Gaza and who are the Gazans? Can its 2 million people be moved out of Gaza should they be moved? Despite what the uninformed reporters and diplomats may say, and Sylvie, take notes here, Gaza is not sovereign land. It is a non-sovereign territory, which today, right now, is illegally occupied by the terror group Hamas. And it's an ISIS-style terror group. I call them ISIS-G. For almost 500 years, Gaza was a Bedouin backwater in the Ottoman Empire. Turkey lost its colonies after World War I when its empire was dismantled. Gaza then became a British mandate and was expected to become part of the Jewish homeland alongside numerous other national states created for the Arabs by the League of Nations. In 1948, Egypt illegally invaded and annexed the Gaza Strip as part of its war against Israel, but Israel reclaimed it in the 1967 Six-Day War, massively building up the Gaza economy. After the ill-fated Oslo Accords, Gaza was placed under the administrative non-sovereign authority of the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah. Israel withdrew completely in September 2005, even as world leaders begged the Arabs to create a Mediterranean Singapore. Now they're calling it Mara Gaza or any of those names. But then the terrorist group Hamas arose. It murdered in cold blood the Palestinian Authority representatives and seized control. They have illegally occupied since then and created a murderous cradle-to-grave society of terror and death financed by Iran, Qatar, and the United Nations. Its population went from a mere 250,000 in 1950 to 2 million today, where children learned to kill Israelis before they learned their alphabet. Nor are the Gazans any sort of indigenous people entitled to the land. They like to claim falsely that they are descendants of the Canaanites. False. Canaan, which means the color purple, named for the pigment that the Lebanese Phoenicians pulled from a mollusk, were actually Southwest Asians settled in the land bridge between Asia and Africa. Centuries ago, those Canaanitic people were, of course, not Arabs. Gaza was just sparsely populated desert dune transited by Bedouin traders. And remember, the name Bedouin comes from the Arabic word bada, or sleeping outside, and several bada are called Bedouin, and these people come from the bottom of the Arabian Peninsula. So established Gazan populations were first created by Ramses III in about 1200 BC when he defeated the Greek island invaders known as the Plishtim. To subjugate these violent, baby-sacrificing people, Ramses confined them to 5 work cities known as the Pentapolis. 5 cities: Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, and Gath, which collectively became Philistia, the territory of Philistia. Arabs do not pronounce the letter P, so to them the Greek island invaders were not Plishtim but Philistine, and the enclave became known as Philistia. Remember, these are Greek islanders. During ancient times, the area became known to Jewish and Christian peoples from across the Levant. Obviously, when the Jews were thrown out of Israel, the Romans renamed the territory Syria Palestina, this to erase the Jewish identity and to reward the enemy of the Jews. Anyway, Gaza was swept up in the Islamic conquest of the 7th centuries, and all Jews and Christians who were already in that area were forcibly converted to Islam. Gaza was ruled by the Ottomans as a little inhabited transit zone between the continents. In the early 19th century, Ottoman Sultan Mehmet Ali I, who was born Albanian, transferred thousands of Albanian and Balkan workers there to help cultivate for the insatiable appetite of the palace. During Napoleon's Egyptian campaign to fortify the adjacent areas of Egypt, Egyptian tribesmen were brought in. Many tribesmen. For example, in 1832, Ibrahim Pasha, who headed up the Egyptian forces, moved large groups of Egyptian Hanadi tribesmen from Egypt's Al-Sharqiya province to beef up the already low transferred Al-Hazi Egyptians. After World War I, during the British Mandate, thousands of Egyptian, Sudanese, Libyan, Lebanese, Syrian, and Arabian Peninsula Arabs were called in to work in major projects such as railroads and pipelines, and this to support a concept that the League of Nations called absorptive capacity, wherein workers were imported to enlarge the economy of a now flourishing Jewish Palestine. Trump is thinking bold, like global leaders before him have. After every major war, the map is realigned to address past and future hostilities. After World War I, under America's leadership and the concept of self-determination, empires were dissolved, colonies were liberated, and dozens of countries were outright created by the League of Nations. After World War II, more countries were created, merged, and colonies transferred. This transformed, this time under the United Nations. What has been a terror enclave known as Gaza, with a cradle-to-death murder society cultivated from birth by Hamas, this enclave can no longer exist as it did. Remember, in Gaza, children are indeed taught to kill the Jews before they can memorize their alphabet. The entire strip is a terror infrastructure with more kilometers of terror tunnels than the London Underground, yet not a single bomb shelter for the population, which has been repeatedly urged to die for the Hamas ideology, which rejects all peace or talk of peace. Billions of dollars of aid dwarfing what Europe received after World War II, that's the Marshall Plan, have been vanquished on this group, Hamas, and created a virtual ISIS-style populace. Rather than heed the spirit of the biblical injunction found in Micah 4:3, they will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore, close quote, saith the Lord. No, they instead followed Satan's creed and used their water pipes as missile tubes, their million-dollar benefactions to map murder, their hospitals and schools as terror operations, and they captured the UN pseudo-welfare group UNRWA as the shiny conduit of their misdeeds. This ISIS-style terror enclave is completely different than the post-1964 Arabs who now today call themselves Palestinians residing in Judea and Samaria, which has been until recently falsely called the West Bank. That population in many parts pretends to contemplate coexistence with the Jews. So that's a lie we can live with. But ISIS in Gaza is another matter. Look to history. After World War II, it took 2 generations to de-radicalize the Japanese Bushido death culture that raped and pillaged throughout the Asian Pacific realm. We'll all remember the rape of Nanking and the death marches. It took 2 generations to de-radicalize Nazi Germany, which had created a monstrous hate cult, complete with Aryan youth and Nazi baby factories. In today's Germany, it is still forbidden to display the Nazi swastika. More recently, and most pointedly to our discussion today, we look to the ISIS brides and children created during the hellish reign of the Islamic State. Where are they now? The men, about 10,000, are imprisoned in northern Syria in 28 jails, the largest of which is the Al-Sina prison just outside the tiny Syrian city of Hazakah. They are considered too dangerous to release. No trial, no rehabilitation, just imprisoned, warehoused. These men are guarded by an internationally armed and financed militia known as the Syrian Democratic Forces. Everyone pays into that pot on both sides of the Atlantic, from Jordan to Washington. Where are their wives and children? world leaders, led by the United Nations, have created isolation and rehabilitation camps for ISIS families. About 6,000 women and children, most of them, about 93%, are female. No training, no rehabilitation, in fact, and only the flimsiest efforts at de-radicalization. Actually, they're being housed and they're being warehoused to keep them away from civilized society. These camps are also in northern Syria, not far from the prisons. Al-Hal and Raj are two of these typical camps, and they're actually administered by the Red Cross on behalf of various UN bodies. And once again, I want to repeat, ladies and gentlemen, this is for the families, the wives, and the children. Many of them are under the age of 10, who now remain as blood-curdlingly devoted to murder, terror, and mayhem as ever. This was documented in an NBC special report where the youngest of children, I think there were 6 or 7, showed that they wanted to behead the reporter. So, just moving ISIS-type Gazans to other countries means just importing a murder cult as your next door neighbor. We see this in Australia, which has taken the largest number of Gazan refugees, more than 2,000. And suddenly we see polite, congenial Sydney explode with mass Arab demonstrations screaming, "Gas the Jews, gas the Jews." Eisenhower would have never believed it. Ladies and gentlemen, the war with Hamas is not a conflict of territory. It is a religious war, like the one ISIS waged, and in the style of ISIS. It cannot be solved by any means other than defeat of the enemy and de-radicalization of their society over 2 generations, if not 3 generations. The road to statehood cannot be paved over our burned and battered babies, our raped and tortured hostages, regardless of the lies, distortions, and what is the deepest of the deep fakes, whether practiced in Gaza for an ignorant media.
Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
Or Harvard University for the youthful idiots among the student body. So, Mr. Eisenhower, Merrill, what do you say about that?
I say you're 100% right. It's a religious war. It's an idea. It's a thought. It's something else. Anytime you have isms, I say isms in history, right? So you have racism, anti-fascism, you have anti-Semitic, which is an ism as well. Any type of ism that you have is bad, and now you have a religious aspect, a component, a crusade, if you will, in their minds, and it's terrible. And this reaches back all the way to 1080, or I guess it'd be 1098. Whenever you have the first world crusades coming from Europe all the way across. The difference is that during that time, Israel, and especially Jerusalem, became a place of open prayer, open love, open appreciation, open religion, and so did most of that area. Damascus was even Christian all the way up until recent. But anytime that you put yourself into that, anytime that you have stories in coffee shops going around in certain areas of the world talking about the destruction and how certain populations do certain things, it causes genocides, it causes deaths. And what happened in October in Israel is absolutely horrific. And that Israel has every right to defend itself in every way that it possibly can. And so do the Jewish people. The most persecuted people in the whole entire world, in the history of the world, are the Jewish people. And people forget that. And we need to understand that as sons, like I said before, as the sons and daughters of Abraham, we need to respect and love them. And we need to make sure that we're loving each other and promoting peace, because without a radical change in that area, the fighting will continue. What is that radical change? Well, sometimes it takes war, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it takes a different leader. But in this particular case, whenever they're willing, when you can honestly say, if all the Hamas put down their firearms, it would be peace. If all the Israeli people put down their firearms, there would be devastation and destruction. Anytime you can say that and actually mean that and know that that's actually reality, there's a huge problem, and there's something that needs to be fixed and changed. I don't have solutions for that at this moment. I'd be happy to talk more about that, though, for sure, and come up with something. But
yes,
I think
I think that we're all looking for a solution to that. We've tried every formulation. We've tried every formula over the past 80 years. And the only thing we can hope for now is to remove that threat, de-radicalize it somehow over 1 to 2 generations, do it humanely in a civilized fashion. But we must realize that an ISIS society has been created. Thank you, Merrill. And now I'm going on to my next topic, Ukraine. The word Ukraine means borderland. And that's because this territory, with its distinctive society and language, has been a borderland realm tossed between a collection of Eastern European countries from Poland to Lithuania to the Habsburgs to Russia. In 1991, in the wake of the collapse of the Soviet Union, Ukraine became independent. Everyone knows who started this war and became the aggressor with a green light from Biden. It was Putin. Everybody knows who has committed most of the heinous war crimes and butchery. It is Russia. And we all know from World War II that Russian troops believe rape and pillage is every soldier's entitlement. Stalin even admitted as much to Roosevelt. I must add that Ukrainians, to their core, hate Russia, and with good reason. Every Ukrainian family knows that in 1932 and extending into 1933, Russia under Stalin deliberately starved millions of Ukrainians in the Holodomor famine, and it did kill 3 to 4 million Ukrainians. Photos from the period show the streets littered with skin and bones, human beings, dead bodies, starved by deliberate imposed famine. These are the facts that Europe, enlightened Europe, created. But years from now, historians will also note that beginning in 1991, Ukraine continuously, for decades, threatened militarily its hated enemy, Russia, by trying to join NATO and working to bring NATO cannons to Russia's doorstep. The following information is not from Putin, but from NATO's own documentation archive. In 1991, just after independence, the newly independent Ukraine joined the North Atlantic Cooperation Council and the Partnership for Peace program. And by 1994, they were full members. In 1997, Ukraine signed NATO's charter on a distinctive partnership pledging to join NATO. In 1997, the NATO-Ukraine Commission was created as the main body responsible for adding Ukraine to NATO. And in 2008, at the Bucharest summit, NATO and Ukraine pledged that Ukraine would indeed join NATO. This declaration was reaffirmed by NATO leaders in 2009. Obama supported this entire Ukraine-NATO configuration as an international strategy. Remembering once again that Putin is the aggressor, continuously provoked by military threat, but nonetheless the monstrous aggressor. Let's look at what Ukraine has done to my people, to my father's generation, to my grandfather's generation, and beyond, and even to my generation. Start with Bogdan Khmelnytsky. President Zelensky just issued a new stamp with his image, Khmelnytsky, and he is depicted on his trusty horse in numerous heroic statues in Ukraine and even in Washington, D.C. Who was Bogdan Khmelnytsky? Well, he was a founder of Ukraine's national identity in the 1640s. He was the leader of the Cossack Revolution. As head of the Cossacks, Khmelnytsky is the organizer, personal leader, and torchbearer for the mass murder of 20,000 mostly Polish Jews. His sword-swinging horsemen would invade the village, kill the men, rape the women, and burn the houses and the fields. You've all seen the Fiddler on the Roof movies. For years after Khmelnytsky, Jews were vilified, hunted, and murdered in Ukraine by ordinary Ukrainians. Immediately after World War I, during just a 2-year period, Ukrainian General Semyon Petliura, his forces killed as many as 80,000 Jews in a massive town-by-town sweep of bloodlust, about 1,000 massacres in 500 villages. Yet this atrocity and the name Petliura is unknown to almost everyone listening to my voice. 80,000 brutally massacred in 2 years, many eviscerated by the sword, and yet no one remembers the name, even though I do. Then we get to the Holocaust of bullets. 1.5 million shot in the ditches and forests, mainly Ukraine, by the Nazi Einsatzgruppen. But look closer. You know the Nazi killers marched the Jews out of their homes, stripped them naked, men, women, and children, and shot them in the head, Jew after Jew, compressing the bodies into what they called sardine configurations, stuffed into gullies and great ditches. Ultimately, tens of thousands of defenseless, completely innocent Jewish civilians were mass murdered, and more than 33,000 of them at only one site, Babi Yar, outside Kiev. The Nazis did this, but the Nazis had help. As soon as the Germans arrived, several major Ukrainian new and existing militias became active Nazi collaborators. First, the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalism, or OUN. Second, the Ukrainian People's Militia and the Ukrainian Insurgent Army, plus numerous independent groupings of Ukrainian Cossacks, such as Taras Bulba militants. The Nazis authorized and controlled these various groups of Ukrainians in several ways, forming the Hilfspolizei, or police auxiliaries, as well as the Schutzmannschaft, or guarding police. And then Berlin actually authorized a Ukrainian staffed Waffen-SS division for general military duties. Specifically, I refer to the 30th Waffen Grenadier Division of the SS. Within a year, some 52,000 local villagers in the Ukraine had been enrolled in more than 50 Nazi auxiliary police units spread across the Ukraine countryland. Another 14,000 were in Reich organized village and city police units. Almost 55,000 operated as a rural Nazi guard. Historians have documented about 100,000 militarized police and fighters in Ukraine, touching households and families throughout the land. Compare all that 100,000 to just 10,500 German Orpo police stationed in Ukraine, and less than 2,000 actual Einsatzgruppen killing soldiers in Group C and D. 2,000 Einsatzgruppen and 100,000 helpers. The Nazis had help, and that help was abundant. Skip to today. The Nazi movement survived strong in post-war Ukraine, right through the commencement of the current war with Russia. Putin alleged that Nazis were rife throughout Ukraine. That was denied, but it is true. The vaunted Azov Brigade, with its distinctive swastika-derived logo and neo-Nazi ideology, has been well documented. Its roots are traced to a band of right-wing lunatics in the 1980s. When the war broke out, they were the vanguard against Putin's invasion, and the story was then promulgated far and wide that overnight the Azov Brigade had denazified itself, like in 72 hours. I close this portion by urging everyone to see my highly documented episode of the Edwin Black Show entitled "What Ukraine has done to the Jews. In the meantime, look today. Ukraine votes to condemn Israel in the UN about 90% of the time. In 2022, Zelensky demanded, or should I say blackmailed, Israel for a $500 million preferential loan plus an Iron Dome and Iron Beam setup just for the pleasure of a meeting, which was indeed to please the Biden anti-Israel, pro-Ukraine gang in Washington. Last, if not least, I remember growing up in Chicago in a poor neighborhood where we went to a Ukrainian woman's apartment for haircuts. She used to ask my mother and me, how did we hide our horns so well? I end by recognizing that Donald Trump wants to end this war, stop the killing and destruction. He doesn't care if he uses a flamethrower or a flower pot. He'll praise, insult, cajole, trade, flatter, and anything else unconventionally to achieve the goal that history will recognize, that Trump brought about a quick conclusion of the war and established a lasting, secure, and reliable peace, too big to rig and too loaded to breach. So while we're fighting for your freedom, Ukraine, please allow me to remember how many tens of thousands of Jews Ukraine persecuted and murdered generation after generation. And as a parting shot to qualify for saving you, I'm willing to submit to one more Ukrainian inspection. I cut my hair short to make sure you could see no horn. All right, what do you guys say about that, Merrill?
Well, first of all, I don't know why anybody would think you would have horns. You're actually a very wonderful human being. So that's craziness. So when you talk about Ukraine and Russia have a very checkered history already. It goes back well beyond before the United States was even a country. It goes back to even past the Golden Horn State, right? So when you start talking about history, you start looking at the areas of conflict and influence, Ukraine has never really been a country, right? So Ukraine has been a piece here and there. It's been moved and back. It's a lot like Poland. The borders are artificial. They're not real. They were there because of after the fall of the Soviet Union. So Ukraine is fighting for itself. It has a self-identity, but yet, what is it? 15% of the population still speaks Russian as their primary language. So when you talk about Ukraine, it has an identity crisis. It has a problem. And to be honest with you, yes, the United States has some blame for this issue as well. I mean, NATO is, my great-grandfather was the first commander of NATO. And NATO has continued to move their borders towards Russia. At the fall of the Soviet Union, we told Russia that we would not move our borders 1 inch. And yet, that's what NATO said. We're not going to move those borders 1 inch. And yet they keep moving closer and closer and closer. So when you talk about it, you have to understand both sides, right? You have to talk about both issues and both things. Now, what the Ukrainians did throughout history to the Jewish population, that's absolutely terrible, especially during World War II. That's more recent for me. But most Ukrainians, the Ukrainians used to be wanderers almost, The Kazakh state that you mentioned before was something that defeated Napoleon's rear guard on Napoleon's march back to France. So whenever Russia and France was at war. So when you start talking about it, there's a lot of issues that go on there. The main thing that needs to be done is that the United States does not need to be pulled into that war in particular. And the reason why is because, number one, if we get pulled in, NATO gets pulled in, and then you have a much larger conflict than we currently do. Number two, I would be happy to assist more on certain things because I believe peace is the ultimate answer, but I want to know where the money is that we've already spent. And so that would be the other thing that I would say. So if you have an accountability for the money and I can understand where the money went and I can understand it, I'm not all that smart, so it needs to be dumbified, right? If it's all put in place where everybody can take a look at it and understand it and it's accounted for, maybe that's a different conversation, but Europe needs to take care of itself. We have been warned over and over in this country to avoid the entanglements of Europe, right? That was George Washington whenever he was leaving office. Again, Even after World War I, we weren't in the League of Nations that you mentioned before. We didn't participate in that because we went back to being isolationists, introducing and continuing the Monroe Doctrine, right? So the United States itself has a short history of being more global than it is versus a longer history of being more of an isolationist country. Now, NATO has to do their job and do their fair share. Europe needs to do their fair share. If they want Ukraine to continue to fight Russia, that's their business. We need to stay out of that. Russia could be a good ally for us. So could Ukraine. That's a possibility. But so far, what I'm seeing and the back and forth that I'm seeing is posturing on a world stage that is not someone serious about peace. And I know that this administration is serious about peace throughout this world. It is important to do that. As humans in humanity, we must continue to strive to be better than the generation before us. And the only way to do that is to make sure we're working in tandem, trying to make this world, a better place.
Those are sterling words. Now, I have a little more to say. I know that you have a hard stop, so leave if you need to. My last bit, ladies and gentlemen, is indeed about NATO, the first commander of which was Eisenhower. Now, we need to think long and hard about NATO and whether this organization still needs to exist and if we should be in it. NATO is a vestige of the Cold War and the last century. The whole idea of the Mutual Defense Pact is unanimous action and the organization's gleaming Chapter 5. An attack against one is an attack against all. However, we see that since 1952, Turkey has been a member with the second strongest military component. And at the same time, Turkey signed with enemy Russia for 2 installations of Putin's most advanced S-400 air defense system, which NATO declared to be inconsistent with acquiring the F-35 aircraft, which was in fact designed to defeat the S-400. The U.S. canceled the Turkish F-35s, but has toyed with re-enabling the purchase. Most troubling is Turkey's determination to become a recolonizer and reestablish the Ottoman Empire through invasion, co-option, and coercion. This has begun already in recent weeks when President Erdogan's son led a giant procession through Istanbul, promising to conquer Jerusalem and oust Israel from the Middle East. Just days ago, Turkey sealed a mutual defense pact with ISIS 3.0 in Syria, and with its now business-suited neo-ISIS leader Jolani, Turkey already has 2 provinces for absorption, and even now, Turkey controls numerous Syrian towns such as Al-Bab, Azaz, Manbij, Jarablus, Rajo, Tal Abyad, and Ras Al Ain, under direct Turkish military control, every one of them. And right now, Turkey is setting up an air base on the Syrian side of the Golan Heights. So ask this question, friends. If Israel and Turkey get into a skirmish in Syria, does that invoke Chapter 5? Does Israel go to war with Canada, America, the UK, Germany, and so forth? Before you answer that, ask how an emergency NATO meeting was just held to support Ukraine without the U.S. being invited. And how did that occur? And remember, NATO member Norway just a day or 2 ago refused to supply fuel to a U.S. naval vessel because it did not like Trump's Oval conversation with Zelensky, which is a non-member Ukraine. So instead of marching into war, into slogans toward the jingos, and just because, perhaps there is a better way to peace by strength and the avoidance of conflict. So we don't have anyone else with us because Merrill had to leave. But Sylvia, do you have a thought about NATO and Ukraine before I take questions?
I do. I have many thoughts, actually. First and foremost, what I have seen the amount of money and resources we have poured into the Ukraine, and I understand our reasoning for doing that. And I wonder if we're asking ourselves deeply enough, is it still worth our interest? Is it still in our best interest? I also want to know what European countries are doing to support the Ukraine. The buck has been passed to the United States for so long, and I would like to see European countries start to equally contribute the way America has.
Okay, so listen, that's an excellent question, and somebody's got to answer it. So we've got a couple of questions. We're running over time, and I'm going to answer them live now. The first one comes from one of the gentlemen watching, and I don't have his name, but it says, "Dear Edwin, thank you for all your tireless, important work. Could you give us an update on the film IBM and the Holocaust?" Ladies and gentlemen, I just wait for them to say, show up so we can film you. It is going to be a multi-million-dollar film. It was delayed by COVID. It was delayed by the actors' strike. It was delayed by the director's strike. But as I understand, it's going to go into production soon. And the hope is that it'll be an Academy Award drama with major stars for the 2025 entry. Thank you for that question. Rita in Century City. I understand there's a large Palestinian population living in Tampa. Please address the atmosphere in Tampa from this community. You're absolutely correct, Rita. That is the problem. Sylvie, give us 1 minute. What do you say about the local contingents in the neighborhoods?
Yes, there's a very large Palestinian population that borders the university's area. It is in a community that is known for radicalizing. There is deep ties with international terrorist organizations and several cases where terrorists have come from this community and have been caught either in the process of executing an attack or involved in an attack.
Okay, so we have a final question from Harvey in Tampa. He said, what would Ike have said about 10/7, about October 7? And Merrill Eisenhower had to go because we ran over, but I will pretend to answer for the legacy. And I will say this, that he would say another Normandy invasion is needed. And so, my friends, we see that Israel has been a lion out of Judah. The Jews, instead of jumping into the shooting pits of Ukraine, ran in boldly and fully armed into the tunnels of Gaza. They attacked and counterattacked under the ground, on top of the ground, in the air, and on the sea. And it's been truly a series of biblical style miracles. We're out of time. I want you to hold for my closing word of wisdom just 2 minutes away. But first, I want to thank my very knowledgeable guests who shared their wisdom and took time from their schedules. I mean, Merrill Eisenhower, film director Wendy Sachs, and USF Hillel director Sylvie Feinsmith. I also thank my talented international team, including Virginia and New Jersey, Wes in the Bay Area, Richard in the Philippines, Carol in Maryland, as well as many others in numerous additional cities around the world. My team, each of them, is comprised of very dedicated people. I and we all owe them. I'll see everyone back here in 2 weeks at 3 p.m. Eastern. You want to be a friend of the Edwin Black Show? Go to theedwinblackshow.com/support. Keep me independent. You want to hear me speak in person? Watch my website for events. Consult my events page at edwinblack.com. Until then, head over to any Barnes and Noble in the U.S. or any Amazon, Walmart, iTunes Books, Google Books, Kobo, or Audible.com platform in 190 countries across this roiling, toiling, boiling planet, where you can find any of my 225 book editions, such as IBM and the Holocaust and Banking on Baghdad. You want an autographed copy? Hit edwinblack.com and click Books. Get access alerts to participate in live future shows at theedwinblackshow.com. You'll see a much enhanced and exquisitely produced version of this show in about a month, even less. And prior episodes, by subscribing to our YouTube channel at The Edwin Black Show and click that notification button like tens of thousands of others have. You'll love them. We put new ones up each week produced by my bold international crew. Follow me at Edwin Black Book on X as well as Facebook. And now, for my closing word of wisdom. Now is the time to realize that we only have two choices: prevail or perish. I'm zooming out from Tampa. Bless all of you. Pray for all that is unfolding before our very eyes.